Hey, this is Mrs. Pelly. Uh, Today I'm doing a demo on teeth because a student asked me about teeth, and I don't normally go over this just because there are ways to avoid drawing teeth in an image, but if you are pretty serious about doing portraiture work, or if you're just curious, this will be a good demo for you. One thing I told the student is anytime I start drawing something that I'm not as familiar with, or really anything in general, I always like to have a reference image and really study the picture. So this first picture is an actual photograph of somebody's teeth. Of course, this is someone who would be smiling a lot more than what you would normally incorporate into a portrait. So normally, if you're doing a portrait, the lip would cover up the bottom row of teeth. But I wanted to include this so that everyone could see what the bottom teeth looked like. Okay. And then I also have like a diagram of the specific types of teeth, their names, and where they would be located inside of the mouth. This helps me. I really like to sort of study in depth how everything is supposed to work, what it's supposed to look like as I get started with a new drawing. So I'll be working from these images. Let's get started. Okay. So just like with any drawing, I do kind of make some quick sketches, just to sort of give me some boundaries, a little bit of grid work, so I can kind of orient myself. Okay, so I'm going to hop back to this image. Okay. Probably want it to be a bit longer, so let's do this. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to sort of center this a little bit more. What I have here is just where the top lip would fall, where the teeth meet, and where the bottom of the teeth would be. And I'm going to start this out almost as an anatomical drawing, just so y'all can see how to draw the teeth by themselves, and then I'll move forward and start to cover it with lips. Okay, so let's hop back real quick and just look. Alright, so I always like to start in the center and work my way out from there. And just like how you would draw eyes, you draw both of your eyes at the same time so that they maintain similarities. Same thing with the teeth. These two front teeth are the same exact type of tooth. So if we hop back over here, they're those front incisors, right? So if I start with those two and I'm drawing them at the same time, then they're going to look pretty similar. And then after that, I work out and start on these second incisors. And if you look at each tooth individually, you'll see that each of them each type of tooth has a different shape to it. So whereas the front two incisors are pretty flat at the bottom, you'll see that the next set of incisors are actually curved along the bottom as well. And then as you move out a little bit further, you get to the canines, and they're a little bit pointed. Okay, and if we hop back over here, you can see number 11 will be your canines. So they are a bit more pointed, and also the root is longer, which of course we're not drawing the root, but it helps me to kind of understand some of its structure a little bit. And then as you move on to some of the molars and the premolars and whatnot, you don't see them as much because you want to keep in mind the perspective, right? That they're getting smaller as they recede into space. This is where, if you've done architectural renderings or two-point perspective drawings, this will kind of help you out as well. So let's see if I can show y'all. So if I have my horizon line like right here, and I have vanishing points, then you can see that teeth recede in an angle, that they definitely get smaller as they go back, but whereas the ones in the front are taller. Okay, so I hope that helps, especially with those back teeth. Okay, so now that we've talked about the different shapes, let's get started. So again, I am starting at the center. My teeth, I already made a grid for myself. They're going to get smaller as they recede into space. Remember, this is my rough draft, so it can be pretty sketchy. Just going to get rid of any lines that I don't need anymore, and this by no means has to be perfect. We're just getting a rough guesstimation of everything. So what I like to do is sort of map out where all my teeth are going to go by drawing where they would fit into the maxilla. Remember, your maxilla is your upper jaw. And if you go look at an image of a skull real quick, then you'll see that that's part of the bone, the bottom part of the skull, and the teeth grow out of it. And if you remove the teeth, then you'll see that there's like a hole right there where the root would go into. Okay? But for now, just focusing on these guys. So these dips right here, where it turns into sort of a V, that's where the gums would go. And we're just doing a curved top for each tooth. And you'll notice that they are already getting smaller as they go back into space. Check my reference image again. And I also like to count out from the center. So I have, can't put my mouse, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can see about 5 teeth, and 5 to 6 is about where I start losing sight of what's going on. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so perfect. I'm going to add in my last couple, 2. And it turns out I'm drawing a little bit smaller than my frame that I set up for myself, but I can quickly adjust that. Make it a bit smaller for myself. There we go. And y'all, drawing is just constantly readjusting. That's why I really like working with rough drafts, is that if I'm not afraid to change something entirely if I need to. If I need to make a whole tooth smaller, I have the freedom and space to do that. Whereas if I were to start off with a final draft of my drawings, I would be really concerned with getting everything perfect on the first go. So don't stress yourself out trying to get these all perfect. Alright, so that 2 more over here. Alright, so again, they're getting way smaller as they recede back into space. Notice that they're on a diagonal slant because of that 2-point perspective. And now I can start focusing on the bottom of the teeth. So I'm going to start from the center again. Again, the first couple of teeth are a little bit squared. I'm not drawing them perfectly square. You can see in the corner here I'm curving it a little bit. Mostly because in nature, you don't have a ton of sharp edges, you know. You can even see right there, it's curved for sure. So now hop back. And notice again that I'm working on the same types of teeth at the same time. That way, they look similar to each other. Then I'm going to move on to the next tooth. So not quite pointy, not quite squared, it is a bit rounded. And then the canines. I'm going to curve that a little bit more, got it a little bit too pointy. I'm going to work over here. You'll also notice that as I'm drawing the bottom part to each tooth, it's staying centered with the top. So even if it's wider at the bottom than it is at the top, it's still centered. Okay, so after the canines, let's look at our reference again. I probably should go back and make the canine a bit wider at the bottom now that I'm looking at it. And this is why it's always great to have a reference image, because there is a huge difference between what you think something looks like than how it actually looks like. So by having a reference image, you're not going to assume anything. You're going to get it exactly the same. Okay, so again, I want to go back and make my canines a bit wider. So it still has that point, but comes out a bit further. There we go. And then for the rest of my teeth, it looked like it was either just a little bit pointed or totally rounded. Alright. You'll also notice that I'm not drawing lines in between each tooth quite yet. Sometimes, especially if you're just doing a black and white drawing, you don't want it to look too liney, if that makes sense. You want it to look natural and organic. So again, like I was saying, how you're not going to find any sharp corners in nature. You're not going to see a ton of straight lines either. And now I know that there are lines in between each tooth. Just for now, before I add shading or anything, I don't want to exaggerate it too much, or it's just going to look a bit cartoony and a bit silly. So I'm just hinting that there's a line in between and leaving sort of a gap in the middle so that it doesn't look cartoony again. Alright, so we got our top row teeth. I think those look pretty decent. And now we move on to the bottom. Now this one, you can't really see the tops of the teeth or really where they grow out from the root. But if we do look at an image, like this medical image of teeth, we can sort of guess the shapes. Now the bottom teeth are going to look pretty similar throughout. They're a lot smaller until you start getting back to the molars. They're just sort of taller and skinnier, if that makes sense. Okay, so again, to stay true to the image, the top of each tooth is going to be covered up by the tooth in front of it. Another thing you'll notice is that the roots are spread out a little bit further from each other. So I'm just going to count real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So same as the top. And I want to see how centered they need to be to each one. So I can see that this one they're not quite as wide as the teeth above. So I just want to take note of that real quick. Okay. Okay. So again, I'm not drawing the lines down entirely. Getting the root, working on my next tooth. This one's a little bit wider, but it's also kind of staggered. So I got 2. Let's see what that third one looks like. So the third one is even wider. And as we move on, they just sort of recede into space. So we're at number 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's going to be pretty good. 5. Did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. Alright. So now we have our top row of teeth and our bottom row of teeth. Right now, this will be my rough draft. I just have everything sort of mapped out, and this is how you would draw the teeth without lips, as if you were drawing it as part of the skull. But let's see what happens when we start adding color, adding some shading, and so on. So right now I'm just getting rid of any lines that I don't need anymore. That way I have some room to cover it with lips. Okay. So I am going to open a new layer. That way if I mess up on the lips by themselves, I can go back and erase without damaging this. So another reason why this is good is because it helps you to understand that your teeth are covered by your mouth and lips. So you kind of do have a bit of layers going on here. Okay, and if you've been in my class for a while, then you know we've talked about the muscles of the mouth and how to draw lips. I'm going to draw it pretty faithfully to this image just so I don't confuse anyone. But you'll see that the top lip is much thinner and darker than the bottom lip. It's sort of stretched across that maxilla. Like we were talking about earlier, you can sort of see that bone. That would be the top part of the bottom part of the skull. It's sort of stretched across there, and you can see almost like exactly where it like cuts off. It starts curving down and relaxing a little bit because it's not so stretched. Okay, then we have the corner of our mouth. Okay, you can kind of see that. Whoa, didn't mean for that to happen. You kind of see that the lip is sort of curved a little bit. It never ends in a point. Again, in nature, you don't have a lot of pointed angles or straight lines. So again, I want to make sure that the corners of the mouth are curved. And as we look at the bottom lip, sort of the same thing. It's sort of stretched across this bone that the teeth are growing out of. And then as it sort of passes over that bone, it relaxes a little bit, curves back upward, and connects to the corner of the mouth. You can also see the inside of the cheek a little bit. And this is great so that y'all understand that the lips are kind of like a muscle too. They're just a little bit different in coloration. But this is a piece of skin, right? Just like a layer of skin that's covering up these bones. Sorry, I know that sounded really gross. Alright, so let's get started on lips. Okay. So, I always like to start with a little bit of a dip. That way I can kind of figure out where the corner's going to be, or where the center's going to be, and then I like to come out, sort of figure out where my end point is going to be. So, I'm not super duper concerned with the top lip. It should be pretty straightforward. Since it's stretched out, it just sort of looks like a curved line in a sense. Alright, and I have a little bit of a cupid's bow in place. This person is smiling big. Okay. And usually with a normal smile as well, the corners of the mouth don't extend so far. They might end around here normally. So that you're not seeing as many teeth, but this is still the same steps. Alright. So, I want to look one more time. See. I also want to take note of where the lip falls in terms of how it covers up the tooth. So all the roots of these teeth are covered up. So I'm going to start about here. Again, I'm sort of measuring. I want to make sure it's definitely wider than the top. Maybe in between here and here. Okay. And we're going to curve back. Curve. Really, it's just connecting lines right now. Connecting dots with lines. Alright. So, let's hop back. Alright, so this one looks a little bit more squared. I'm just going to make sure that right here, it really curves. There we go. Alright, so now I can start working on a final draft. So I'm going to create another layer. And since I'm working on Krita, I do like to use a different color so I can see where I'm tracing. Oops. Alright, and this is where I do want things to look pretty accurate. Start adding some finesse to your work. Actually, I'm going to change the color on that because I can barely see it, and that probably means that y'all can barely see it as well. So for the lips, let's start with that. And I'm trying to go with sort of a fleshy color so that it just blends into the layers below or above it as I start adding color to this. And I like to do like a series of lines instead of just one straight line because it's almost impossible to draw yourself a perfect line, or at least the line that you want. So let's get you over there and work on this side. Okay. And then I can start working on my bottom lip. Biggest smile award goes to this person. Okay. I got a little crazy right there. Okay. So I'm going to go back and get more of a pinkish color for the gums. And I'll start adding in the gums of the teeth. And this side. Alright, and then I don't see any others. So let's move on to where the teeth meet. And we're almost done. And so I'm going to get not a true black, because again, if you've been in my class, you've heard me say that black doesn't truly exist in nature. And get a color that's going to be almost like a shadow right here later on. I guess I can go ahead and connect these back here since that's all that we can see. And that's going to be pretty dark anyway. Alright, bottom teeth. So now I can get rid of my first and second layer, and I'm going to start applying color. Building layers. So at this point, you're just coloring, painting, whatever material you're using. I'm going to go ahead and change my pen as well. And just start building color. So the gums are going to be a little bit pinker, and the lips will be a little bit more red. And another thing about coloring your teeth is still understanding how things are going to be layered. So right now I'm doing a base coat of color. And then you want to go back, and as they reseat to the corners of the mouth, it gets darker, and obviously the closer to the light source or the front will be lighter. So I'm going to start layering some darker colors in here. And just start shading. So not covering up all that pretty pink, and just adding a bit of shadow. And for the sake of time, I'm not making everything super duper smooth. I'm just showing y'all how you'll generally shade. And if you're working with oil paints or something like that, you might, for the colors, use alizarin crimson, white, and ultramarine blue for the gums, because I see, like, in the actual image there are some blues in there. Okay, let's jump for another brush. Oh, what do I want? Let's try that. So I'm going to start working on the back of the mouth. Oh, that's pretty dark. See how this pen does for us. Alright, that looks pretty good. Coloring in. Alright, so let's talk about coloring in your teeth. So I think the temptation for teeth is to go with a bright white color, which is not what you want to do, because what you'll end up seeing is if you have a whole portrait and your teeth are just pristine white, they are going to be out of place. They're going to pop more than anything else and look too perfect. Your teeth will actually have a bit of a yellow color to them. I know that sounds a bit gross and nobody wants yellow teeth, but to make it look naturalistic, you want to start with some sort of base of yellow. And then you can add your shadows and highlights from there. So let's pick, and you don't want anything nasty yellow, so I'm going to go with something around here. Okay. And if you're really concerned about this, you can build your colors as you move forward. So I'm going to get a bigger brush. This baby ain't working. Okay. Let's see how this does. There we go. You can already see like it's starting to blend with some of that we got earlier. So this yellow is actually kind of perfect. It's not so yellow that it looks off in coloration or anything like that. And once we add highlights, it'll even take some of that yellowness away. Just coloring it in. And this is just, again, my base color. I'm going to add some more layers of color on top of this in just a minute. Okay, this is just to get me started and a place to start blending some of those highlights and shadows onto. Okay. So now that that's done, I did see that there was a bit of a reflection of blue in there. So what I'm going to do, and I know not everyone has this capability with whatever medium they're using, but if you do, this is a good option. So I'm going to pick a light blue, not green. And I lowered the opacity, meaning that this is going to be more transparent. Let me see it. There we go. So we're just going to do a light blue here, just to be sort of a reflection. And I've decided my light source is coming from over here, so any highlights will be on this side. Okay, I got a little bit heavy-handed on some of those, but it's alright. So let's talk about shadows. Just like any other drawing, I don't really like to add black as shadows, so we're going to go for sort of like a natural orangey yellow color. Let's see how that works. Oh yeah, I think that will do just fine. And then sometimes I also like to add some blood tones, meaning some like dark reds in between as well, and that can help out. Then go back to my details brush and making sure that these back teeth are going to be darker. And you can see now that I'm adding the shadows, that the shadows kind of act as that line in between each tooth. So it doesn't look as cartoony, a little bit more natural. And I know this is turning into a longer video. I'm going to try to get through this pretty fast. Really focus on the top teeth. The bottom teeth, the biggest difference will be just that there is a bit of a shadow over them since that top row of teeth is covering them. So you'll want to make sure that you add a shadow there. Alright, so let's add some highlights. And get finished with this. For the highlights, I will use like an actual white. And just add just a bit highlights. Again, less highlights as you get closer to the back. And more highlights in the front. Alright, so with the exception of the lips, here is our drawing of the teeth and mouth. I hope this helped with any of y'all who struggle with teeth, and let me know if y'all have any more questions. Okay, and right now I'm just adding highlights to the gums. Alright, bye y'all.